Hi everyone, and welcome to this series. So today's session is about AI in 2024, and in particular, what the 2023 development means for all of you and all of us in the sphere. My name is Charles Helleputte, and I'm heading the EU data privacy practice at Squire. I'm based in Brussels and in Paris. And before I introduce you to Julia, who has kindly accepted to do this with me, I have a few housekeeping items to mention. The first one is that we are recording today's program. So during the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. We will be circulating the materials as well as the recording in the days following this session. Second, if you experience any technical difficulties during the session, please send a message via the Q&A panel, which is located in the lower right of your screen, and ask for assistance from the host. This will be picked up by our wonderful IT support team. Last but not least, so we have scheduled a time to answer questions at the end of the session. Please use the Q&A function and select all panelists to ask a question directly to our team. If we are unable to answer your question due to time constraint, we will follow up with you shortly afterwards. Last but not least, there is a CLE code for those who hope to get CLE credit whilst listening to us. Unfortunately, you will have to listen throughout to get the CLE code, so stay with us and you will get the code momentarily. That's all for logistics, so let me start by first introducing all of you to Julia. So Julia, who is my partner based in New York, and who will offer us a great US insight and input on what is happening on that side of the ocean. Julia, if you don't mind, moving us to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Yeah, so thank you. So today, basically what we are going to focus is, we have like cherry-picked a couple of items that we think are key and that happened in 2023, and that will shape basically or a year in 2024, and we will go through them. So we don't pretend that this cherry picking is exhaustive or complete. It's just that we think those are the one you really should know about. On the EU side, I'll cover and go through the EU AI model clauses. Of course, I'll have to speak a bit about the EU AI Act. Going briefly as well to another instrument that probably no one's is looking or considering, but that could have some importance for organization globally, which is the perspective of an upcoming AI treaty of the Council of Europe. And because AI is probably shaping the use of data by organization, and that's an important piece, but it's also pretty fundamental for democracies. And as you all know, 2024 is one of the major election years in history, and it will be shaped by AI. And I think it's important that we spend some time on some of the risk and also some of the steps that have been taken to address them. Julia will go through a fantastic list of AI development in the US. So if you think that nothing is happening on the US side, that's certainly wrong. So they don't have an EU AI Act, but they have many other things that will that have an impact for your day-to-day. No surprise if we bet on prediction for this year, AI governance will take an important part for all of you. And probably litigation will also be important, and we'll explain why we think that could be the case. Moving on to the next slide. So don't worry, we won't go through each of those items in the timeline, but nevertheless, we have tried to identify for all of what happened in the past year that have shaped to some extent or that are important development and milestones in the AI sphere. And as you will see when you will be looking for doing an AI quiz with your family at night, or if you really want to go through all of them, you will see that of course a lot happened. And it happened both on the regulatory front, so with important development that leads us close to a final EU AI Act being approved and being there, but also a lot of other things. So we have product launch, we have a lot of enforcement action already by many different authorities, whether they are in the US or in EU. And so there are a lot of things that we could potentially cover, but as I explained, we will cherry pick only a couple of them. And we can move to the next slide, please, Julia. So what happened in the EU? As I said, I'll focus on three things. So one is the EU or AI Treaty, better said, the Council of Europe AI Treaty, but you will know soon why those two are very linked. EU AI model clauses and the political agreement, of course, on the EU AI Act. That's the kind of timeline. So we had the first draft of AI Treaty in July. We had the model clause in October 2023, and the political agreement on the EU AI Act on the 8th of December. If we were to cover more than a year, even just for January 2024, you already have a lot of development, and you probably have heard and seen that today the UK also came up with some action on what they will be doing in the AI space, which is no new rules, but a lot of investment in trying to promote and educate regulators and agencies. We won't cover that today, but it's fair to say that developing this space in our space happens daily. Thanks to you, we can indeed move to the first one. So the AI Treaty, what is it? So it's important to remind ourselves what's its exact name. So it's a framework convention on AI, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. It's something that is done at the level of the Council of Europe. If you are already lost and puzzled with how EU rulemaking is happening, and then we add another layer of complexity, which is the Council of Europe, which has nothing to do with the EU, but still has a lot of EU member states and all member states as part of it, in addition to the European Union and many other countries. But it's an organization that is really has as main focus human rights and democracy. And they have considered that AI is such an important topic that it deserves a treaty that will basically set for all Council of Europe members, but also for all of those who will eventually accept to be bound by that treaty, set a number of fundamental principles about what it means to apply or to use AI cognizant of fundamental rights. What is interesting is that, no surprise probably, we have two blocks trying to shape that treaty in a very different manner. The US, even if the US is only an observer in the Council of Europe, the US has an approach where it tries to restrict the scope of application of the treaty to only public authorities, while on the EU side, there is an attempt, at least, to have the AI treaty applying both to public and private sector organization. And also, the EU has a kind of mandate to try to shape the EU, the AI treaty, in a way that is very much in line with the EU AI Act. So really, we have the EU AI Act that is in the process of being finalized and adopted at EU level. And the EU is trying to promote that and impose it to some extent by having the AI treaty, taking a lot of the rules and the set of governance and imposing it to the others. Whether that will work remains to be seen. We are a bit at a turning point at that end, because there are a lot of negotiation going on what will be a text capable of being approved by everyone. There is hope or betting that the adoption would be for May 2024. That's just the adoption. Then that treaty will need to be ratified and then implemented by all the ratifying parties. So it's not for tomorrow, but it's important to mention that we have that kind of global effort that is not just on the EU side, but it's wider than that. Thank you, Julia. So of course we have as main things that will be very relevant for everyone. We have the EU AI Act. The EU AI Act, even if in the last weeks of 2023 we had a lot of drama around its adoption or its non-adoption, I think by now it's fair to say that unless we have final last minute drama, we will have a EU AI Act. We have an EU AI Act that is a compromise from the original version. It remains and stays with the key principle, which is a risk-based approach, but also, probably even more important, it also aims to impose the EU views outside of the border of the EU. So for all developers and people who are deploying AI, if they want to target the European market, they will need to obey to this piece of regulation. And they will basically time to act is now, because even if there is a long timeline for adoption for many of the provision of the EU AI Act, you already have a couple of things who starts to kick in pretty earlier on. So 6 months after the final adoption of the text, all of the prohibited uses will have to go away. So, and that's important. And also then you have a phasing up to 2026. But as we will discuss later on, we believe that 2024 will be a year of active work in the AI governance space. Thank you, Julia. We can go very quickly through this. Basically, why is the EU AI Act important? So it's important because it's one of the first horizontal set of rules governing AI systems. It's known for the extraterritorial reach. It's known also for being capable of high fines for non-compliance, but really, and probably similar to what we had in the privacy world, fines are not really what are the most problematic here. You don't want to be front page of the Wall Street Journal or any other major newspaper for an improper use of AI. Improper meaning an AI system that will create bias, that will create discrimination, or that is fed by a non-qualitative type of data. Moving on to the next one, Julia. So just reminding, what is the EU AI Act key takeaways? So we had a very easy world when we had prohibited risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. That's the Commission proposal. We now have, on top of that, a kind of special treatment for generative AI. We'll discuss that in greater details afterwards, but what is important to keep in mind at this stage is that indeed the text keeps, let's say, that risk-based approach, tackling primarily high-risk AI, and for those high-risk AI systems, imposing a number of important requirements around transparency, cyber resilience, and risk management. But there is a lot more in the EU AI Act, and as we expect the EU AI Act to really be the benchmark for global compliance, and of course it's a European speaking, but that's something that everyone will need to grasp and understand. We can move to the next one. Yeah, thank you. Whilst the EU AI Act was in the process of being developed, we had a lot of clients who were already getting ready to comply. And one of the things that people were struggling with was to understand and determine how they will push EU AI Act requirements through contractual provision. So, for example, when they vet external provider of AI, what should they have in place to try to protect them and impose the right level of requirements on those counterparties. Julia and I and many others at the firm have tried our best to come up with provision, but we were relieved to see that in October 2023, the EU came up with its own type of model clauses. I think it's important for everyone to realize that they exist because it's still relatively unknown. It's true that it's primarily done for public organizations who procure AI system, but it's a very good benchmark to use for private organization to see if what was done and what type the provision that you came up with were the right one. Those model clauses are based on the initial EU AI Act proposal. So as there is some deviation from the EU AI Act, initially we'll see whether or not a new version of the clause will come up. But I think it's important to see how they work and what they do. So basically, they work as a schedule from an existing contractual arrangement. So it's not really standalone. And you have two sets of clauses that are based on the risk classification of the EU AI Act, which is one set of clauses for the non-high risk AI system and one set of clauses for the high risk AI system. So if we move to the next slide, we'll see how those clauses work. And basically, it's a set of clauses and appendix, and you will see that they are really working throughout the requirement of the EU AI Act. So it's essential requirements around risk management system, data governance, transparency, record keeping, and they really provide you with actual clauses to introduce in your agreement. So it's a very good starting point to try to see how best impose those requirements on external providers. And the same goes for provisions that are specific to high risk, such as the obligation of the supplier, the quality management system that they need to come up with, the conformity assessment and corrective actions, etc., etc. But it's I highly recommend everyone to look at it. And in the slide that we will share with you, you will have an actual link to the clauses, so you can have a look. Thank you, Julia. We can move to the next one. And that's you.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I have nothing quite so specific to share, just a lot of a patchwork of different rulings and activities to share with you in the US for 2023. And then we're going to make some predictions for you. Okay, I will not bore all of you by reading the slide. We have picked on here some milestones that we thought were significant in AI in the US. We started the year with a copyright infringement suit. As Charles and I were discussing this, some of you may remember the famous James Carville statement about it's the economy, stupid. Well, here it's the data, although we won't use stupid. So we started with the copyright, privacy, all the things. But in the end, all of these are dancing around data rights, except for our first development in February, which was, at least I thought was interesting, the political declaration from a whole bunch of countries on responsible military use of artificial intelligence. So that was a little bit of an outlier. US didn't necessarily lead that, but it was launched with US participation. So I thought it was a useful development to share because it shows the breadth of AI related activities. So February, this was sort of the big kind of take note of the FTC as an AI regulator blog post on February 27th. And it was essentially telling businesses to don't use AI as a marketing tactic if in fact there is no AI involved. And that, of course, begs the question of what is AI? And that's a whole nother discussion. I think Charles could probably tell you how many different meetings and definitions the EU went through in order to come up with their definition of the AI. And I don't think it's going to be much easier for the FTC when the time comes, although they have focused on more on the outputs than the inputs. Copyright, big issue in the US, more on the FTC, this time on chatbots and deception, a theme for the FTC, and actually a theme that's gone up into the federal government, using AI to deceive people. And chatbots, robocalls with AI. For those of you in the US, you might have heard how a fake Biden called New Hampshire voters and told them not to go to the polls. So that was just an example of what something the FTC would capture there. Then we have cyber criminals, and then we had a joint statement between the DOJ, CFPB, a financial regulator, and the EEOC, responsible for essentially for enforcing anti-discrimination laws in the employment context, issued a joint statement. Moving along, then the White House released some additional documents in May to support the blueprint for responsible AI that was released in 2022. Not the biggest development, but still relevant because it set the stage for what comes later. June was a big deal, at least for me, because we saw one of the first class action lawsuits alleging, among other things, negligence in AI and marketing, developing, and operating an AI system. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That was one of the first lawsuits. I cannot swear it's the first one, but it is one of the first ones that that we looked at. And I call it a kitchen sink lawsuit because literally every claim you can imagine was in there. Then I think another very interesting development in the US was the fact that the Hollywood actors and writers strike had AI at the center of it. The AI generated imagery and the AI generated content. We'll see in a little bit how that triggered a federal law initiative. FTC launches an investigation into ChatGPT. The Washington Post broke that story. And then the SEC, our financial and public company regulator, got in the game, worried about broker-dealers and investment advisors, and focused on conflicts of interest when AI is used in connection with investment advice and trading. Then the Copyright Office comes out again, because there was a lot of drama, copyright-related drama at the end of August. And then we move on to a series of federal laws when Congress was back in session. We Charles and I will talk a little bit more about this election issues that he introduced. This law did not pass, but it was sort of a notable milestone that people were starting to really think about the election concerns and the need for a federal law to make sure that AI content did not disrupt elections. We then in October saw this draft bill that was in response to the Hollywood strike. And then at the end of October, on Devil's Night, the White House releases the executive order. And that triggered a flurry of activity. In the appendix, we've put sort of what's been completed and what's not as of January 24th, if you're interested in learning more about that. And we see federal agencies starting to issue strategies, policies, and guidance, OMB, Department of Defense, Department of State. And then this is not the last development, but we end the year with the SEC again saying, wait, we're worried about AI. So that's just a quick tour through what happened. The orangey, yellowy text indicates hyperlinks, which you can click through when you get the slides. So another big development was this New York City law about using automated employment decision tools. The reason that we're raising this as a key 2023 development is because New York City is so large and it applies to candidates living in New York City. And it has pretty strict annual bias audit requirements. And I feel in a lot of ways like this will become something of a de facto national standard. So I think it's worth mentioning the implementing rules were adopted and enforcement started in July. So just an example of a local development, not a state development, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Here is a brief, that kitchen sink lawsuit that I mentioned that was filed at the end of June. Here's all of the claims. This isn't even all of them. These are the ones that we selected out of here. But this is this has been voluntarily dismissed since then, which I should have updated the slide to say that, but other similar lawsuits have not been dismissed. And we see everything in here. I think, negligence, I think, is interesting. And some of these kind of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act criminal type claims in there caught my eye at the time. They seem almost, sort of old news now that we've seen so many of them. But I think it's worth looking at these, particularly if you're an AI system provider, to see what people could throw at you, because lawsuits are expensive even if you win them. And we've thank you, by the way, to Sasha, who probably isn't listening, but she puts together periodically this amazing table updating us all in the USAI litigation, and that's back in the appendix. So you can look at that and have that as a resource. And also, if over time you would like an updated version, please feel free to reach out to us. So what's ahead in the US AI? So these are my predictions. These are not an exclusive list of predictions. These are just what I think is important. And mine differs. Different people could disagree on this, but I do think that comprehensive federal AI legislation is unlikely. I work extensively with our public policy folk, and essentially we've sort of come to the conclusion that it's not likely going to be a 2024 activity. One of the kind of trip ups here is whether there needs to be a comprehensive federal privacy law before there can be a federal AI law. And because, as we said a little while ago, it's all about the data. So without this privacy law, would the AI law then become kind of a privacy law too? So I think this is one of the things that's tripping up federal AI legislation moving forward. And one of the things that's tripping up privacy legislation moving forward is the issue of private rights of action. The different parties are pro and con private rights of action. So it's kind of a muddy mess. Into that, President Biden issued its the White House executive order that again was issued on October 30th, and a whole bunch of activity came after that. In the appendix, we've put a list of what's happened. There's sort of these 90-day deadlines. A lot of it was executive orders aren't law; they're orders to the federal government essentially. But as Charles was noting, with the EU AI model clauses, where the public sector goes, the private sector may soon follow. So I think it's worth watching what's happening. In response to the executive order, and a lot did happen. It's not stuff that you can see necessarily in your day-to-day life. It's not a law, but there's been, for example, an effort to increase the number of qualified people to be involved with AI. Okay, so no comprehensive federal AI legislation, but I do think some harm-focused laws and rules will move forward. By harm-focused, I mean vulnerable populations, kids, there was, some of you may know, last week there were the social media companies were called on the carpet, Congress's carpet, to testify about their alleged failure to protect kids on social media from child porn, for example, and a lot of that's produced by AI. National security, according to my public policy colleague, Stacey Swanson, that is a big deal for everybody. A lot of chip regulation, the idea that the U.S. wants to keep its competitive edge. Deep fakes, again, mentioning the Biden alleged robocall, and many of you may have heard that Taylor Swift had a little deep fake incident was it right before the AFC Championship game? I can't remember, but anyway, it was all over the news, and whatever Taylor Swift's involved with usually moves to the top of the pile. So I think there may be a little bit more steam being collected for some laws regulating this kind of false content. The FTC is going to, I believe, continue its regulatory activity. If in the appendix, we've put together, thank you, Giselle and Mary, a list of all of the AI stuff that we could find on the FTC website. But there's a lawsuit pending that's challenging the constitutionality of the FTC's authority and the Chevron doctrine, which is it's about a 40-year-old doctrine that says that absent a court decision, if there's an ambiguous statute, the deference will be given to an agency like the FTC's reasonable interpretation. So if the Chevron doctrine goes away, perhaps some of the FTC's authority will more will be challenged in court. So this Chevron doctrine case before the Supreme Court is a tangential but important thing to be watching with respect to the FTC. But until then, I think we can expect them to continue looking at false and unfair and deceptive trade practices related to AI, privacy related issues, bias, discrimination, and so on, all listed in the back. I think US businesses, at least my clients, are struggling with AI governance. Charles is going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but also with the EU AI Act and its extraterritorial effect. Particularly AI providers will be, if you want to make your system available in Europe, you're going to be subject to the AI Act if you have employees and so on. So I think that extraterritorial impact of the EU AI Act is going to cause businesses a little bit of take some time to get used to. I think one of the things when Charles and I were preparing for this that we have been observing clients struggling with also is employee policies with respect to AI use. Prohibit it, monitor it, which is harder in the EU, and Charles will talk about that in a minute. If you prohibit it, what does that mean? Are there prohibited uses? protected uses, prohibited technology, allowed technology, and so on. And I think employers are really struggling with that. And, you know, unfortunately, we have no really good solution other than, you know, it depends on your business. The AI system providers are really facing a lot of scrutiny, and I think they will continue to face scrutiny. You know, the key issues: privacy, copyright, data scraping, the lawfulness of their data, and I think also data security concerns. I don't know how many of you saw the reports from DEF CON, a hacker conference in Las Vegas, but there were, I think, 50 hackers there trying to break chatbots. So they were able to cause them to do hallucinations and do all kinds of things that maybe the provider did not intend. So that's essentially both a data security concern. They, of course, have a whole bunch of data sitting around, but also the ability to manipulate them. So I think those AI system providers are going to continue to see data issues and data security concerns. And I also think that we're going to see AI regulation at the state and local level. We already mentioned that New York City law for AEDTs, but I think there'll be more. I think also in this U.S. state privacy laws, there are these sort of AI adjacent terms: automated decision making and profiling. They likely will use, depending on how AI is defined, likely involve use of AI technology. And I think in particular, the California regulator, the CPPA, the California Privacy Protection Agency, has recognized this and is considering and revising and taking public input on some rules about assessing AI and its impact on privacy. So I think the AI and the state privacy laws will be important because, as previously noted, we're not expecting a federal privacy law this year, and without a federal privacy law, we're not expecting a federal AI law. There are, as we expect, the harm focused laws and rules at the federal level will move forward. I think there will be AI initiatives and targeted laws outside of the state privacy laws at the state level. Washington has this election protection law, for example, that again is focused on not having fake candidate imagery or voice or other kinds of characteristics, physiological characteristics, be used by the opposition to do things like, as in the case of New Hampshire, say, don't go to the polls. So I think those are my big five. Reasonable minds could disagree on those, but that's what I would be watching for as we move ahead. I think, turn over to you, Charles. I think it would be interesting to do a little bit of compare and contrast on how the election protection work is EU versus US. So there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, so 2024 is a crucial year for democracy because it's one of the year when we will have more election throughout. We saw already in the past how can this information impact the impact elections, and here it's probably fair to say that with the development and the rapid uptick in the technology, there is a kind of fear that AI could play an important role in the election process, and probably not one for educating people and making sure that people go and vote, but rather in the opposite way. And on the EU side, a lot of work has been done first to try to understand how realistic the threat actually was. And if you look at the work of ENISA, which is the EU Cybersecurity Agency, they identified AI manipulation through chatbot and deepfake content as one of the key threats for in general for society, but in particular in the context of the election year. And they mentioned that trust in the EU electoral process will critically depend on the capacity to rely on cybersecurity infrastructure and on the integrity and availability of information. We, on the EU side, we don't like so much electronic voting and those type of things. So we are still very attached to paper in most jurisdiction. That has been the subject of a debate with Julia as well many weeks ago. But it's here. It's not even the fear that the computer can screw vote. So it's really the fact that voters, whatever the way they vote, could be influenced in their choices, impacting democracy. And so we have the statement, we know it's the case. We also had the European Parliament Research Service coming up with its own study, which is frankly flagging issues rather than finding ways to resolve them. But what they have come up with is a statement that reliably detecting GenAI content is a challenge. Of course, when you see the Pope wearing Balenciaga coat, you can probably guess that it's deep fake, but eventually. But it's way harder in the context of election. And so that the spread of false information is really a major threat. And so the EU being the EU, we are very good at producing regulation that try to tackle things. Not sure whether the outcome is exactly the one we expect and whether that will be enough to get the right result. But in addition to the provision around disclosure of chatbot being chatbot in the EU AI Act, you have also a lot of other tools, such as under a new piece of regs, which is called the DSA, that try to fight basically disinformation. We'll see where we land. And I think we should also acknowledge that probably the companies that are deploying and developing GenAI have come to a realization that they have a role to play as well. I believe they don't want to be finger-pointed afterwards for having promoted the spread of disinformation. And you probably have also announcement of a couple of GenAI providers that they will try to limit the possibility to use their tools in the context of election. So let's have some hope in trying and expecting that those elections will run as smoothly as we can. In addition to election, we also have in 2024, as Julia mentioned, I think a kind of to-do list for organization. And I think it's fair to say that if you haven't yet started working on building up your AI governance, you're probably slightly late in the game. It's not too late, but I don't think you will be able to escape that in 2024. And so what we are going to discuss in the couple of minutes we have left is trying to explain what we think could be on your to-do list. First, I think it's really start with those three main questions or tasks, which is identifying risk, identifying necessities, and come up with a project design. So guiding you, let's say, towards something that can absorb the AI system that you contemplate to deploy. So when we said identify risk, there are a couple of things to be done there. as the EU AI Act is a risk-based approach. One of the things you will need to do, even if you are not based in the EU probably, is consider and try to put the AI systems that you either use or procure in the right risk bucket. So am I doing things that is banned? Yeah, hopefully none of you will be doing that, but clearly you should identify it earlier on and not do it. And not do it means not using it, not procuring it, but probably also not injecting money in something that you will not be able to monetize afterwards. And then on the other side, am I doing things that puts me in a high risk category? And unfortunately, those high risk categories are pretty wide, and it's not always easy to draw the line and assess whether you are in a high risk category or you are not in a high risk category. For that things to happen, you need to have a process in place that allows you to identify that you are using AI. And in big organization, that piece is already a challenge. So knowing what we have and knowing the tools that we should put in place to be able to red flag the use of AI and be able to then start doing something. We had one client who realized that within the organization, it has 450 different teams using or deploying or procuring AI system. And so just doing the inventory of the AI uses took them in 2023 one full-time equivalent job for 6 months. So just to conduct interviews and be able to locate it, what people were actually doing. So when you know what you have and you know the risk, it's very important to also identify whether you really need the AI systems that your, for example, I don't know, your data analytics team will come and ask you to deploy. As Julia was mentioning, really the inherent risk of employees doing the wrong things with AI is important. And that means that you probably will have to do two things. One is make sure that you have the right policies in place, but even more, create awareness on those policies and find a way to operationalize compliance, which is not easy. But if you have built other compliance functions, and privacy is one of those aspects, there are probably tools that you can use, but everyone should realize that AI is a kind of specific animal and it requires its own ways to address them. And that's where really the third elements come into play, and it's important. It's come up with a roadmap, basically, which is trying to see how you will approach that and how you will start from close to zero to having being ready for when the things will actually kicks in for the most part in 2026, when the AI Act will be in full force in effect. There is a lot of work to be done there, and you need to do it right to be able to take the steps that are necessary for compliance. If you look at the next slide and see what it means or what an AI roadmap might look like, we typically say that a privacy is a team sport. I think it's even more the case for AI, because AI really requires a lot of collaboration across many functions. Legal is one, privacy is another, ethics is probably another one as well, compliance, and then all of the technical people who also need to be involved. And so really, if you want to do this right, you need to put some people in charge and have AI project leaders, but that we really have to work collaboratively across the organization, across a great range of functions. If you want to have a very overly simplified sense of what it looks like, we can go to the next and final slide, Julia, on the things that need to be done. If you want to do this right, you probably will have a tool that will assess the necessity of the use of a system. You will have a set of due diligence procedures in place that will allow you to vet the vendor that you will be using in your organization. And so a set of AI questionnaires. And then in each and every steps, so whether you procure or whether you develop, you will have a number of things to go through, such as coming up with some form of automation on risk assessment, because there is no point for each and every new users to have someone, an actual person going through and running the methodology for each and every users. That will be very time consuming and probably not overly effective, but also you need to find a repository. So that should be linked to a repository, allowing you to know what kind of AI users are in place within the organization at any given time. And that needs to be really linked to the risk taxonomy. Next to that, so you will have a lot of documentation things to be done to kind of promote accountability. You will be audited on your AI uses. You will receive questions from regulators. You might be subject to litigation, as Julia mentioned earlier on, whether it's class action or whether it's in commercial dispute. So documentation will be key, contractual coverage as well. And hopefully, when you have all of that, you will be close to appreciate the complexity of the new environment you are in, but you will be able to start being ready to deploy and use AI responsibly. And that's all I had on my plate, Julia.
So I'd like to just supplement just on a few things. In addition to the challenge of regulating employee use of AI in the workplace and the different models, prohibit, permit and monitor, ignore, that's been a challenge that my clients have had. But the other contracting has become very complicated. As I mentioned earlier, some of the major generative AI providers are offering limited indemnities for copyright infringement. But other than that, it's in my contracting, I do a lot of AI contracting. I've had very little luck doing a lot of risk shifting with respect to AI. So I think that the contracting, as Charles noted, for the EU, but I think in the US, it will, your limitations of liability, exclusions, that stuff is going to become both more important and more complicated. So just that's another thing that I think is going to be important to sort out early. And I would like to also mention that I think having a discussion with board and management to establish risk tolerance is a really important step. If a company just does not want, really does not want any risk associated with these AI tools, it's important to know that. They have a lot of advantages, but particularly in the employment context, it's a tough line to draw about a tool, as we mentioned in the New York City law, preventing bias in recruitment selection, in financial services, in lending, and other credit-related activities. What is management's risk tolerance? I think is something that is also needs to be part of the AI governance to-do list, and make sure that it, like cybersecurity, becomes a board level issue. In the US, we've recently had the SEC make cybersecurity a board level issue. I think AI also needs to be a board level issue, because I think the risks are equally high, whether they're litigation risks, reputational risks, or regulatory risks. So I think that would be a supplement that I would add. And I want to also say that I've checked the Q&A, and nice person who submitted a question. I'm going to ask Charles right now a question from one of our attendees. How will the AI treaty impact the UK's approach on AI regulation compared to the approach being taken by the EU?
Yeah, and that's, I think, a very interesting question. So first, the UK is a member of the Council of Europe. So if that AI treaty actually move forward, so they probably will ratify it, and then the real work will start, because it will impose on the UK to have in its domestic legislation all of the things that will allow the UK to say that it conforms the AI treaty. Frankly, remains to be seen on what the AI treaty final look is, because if it's contained to public sector, I don't think that it will affect greatly everyone in the street or organization globally. But if it's the requirements of the AI treaty apply both to public sector and to private sector, and that the EU managed to impose its view on the final look of the treaty, then it might be a way for the EU to try to make the UK regulating in the space, even if they really don't want to. So it will be an interesting political games, basically, to see where we land on that one.
We also have another question about, do you think an AI certification will be created like the CIPP for privacy professionals? So I can tell you that the IAPP has already created an AI-related certification. I was part of the inaugural class of trainees. I don't think the certification exam is available yet, but the IAPP, it does have something, but again, it's data and with a privacy emphasis. I expect that we will see other, maybe there'll be cybersecurity AI certifications. I could see this happening in a vendor management. So there's certainly vendor management certifications. So I can see a whole bunch of certifications coming, but the IPP does have one already. I don't know, Charles, is there anything different going on over there on the other side?
Yeah, so I think you're right. So IIPP is waiting for its AI certification to be certified. So before being able to give all of those brave attendees a formal certification, there will be probably other institutions trying to step into that and probably, frankly, make money out of AI certification. We had a lot of those, or we can see a lot of those, when even the EU AI Act was not even approved or close to be approved. So I'm sure that we will have many vendors, and it will probably be for everyone to try to look at which one is really serious and provide some added value. But I'm sure there will be a lot of things out there for sure.
So thank you to our question askers. We always makes us feel like, hey, somebody's actually listening. And I just want to spend a quick minute showing you the appendix. This is our sort of FTC's business blog posts about AI. As you can see, I think there are 17, but I wouldn't swear to it. There's additional content that's been published starting I think March 4th, 2022 is the first sort of real AI related blog post, but there's definitely a theme here. Bias, discrimination, and fairness, I think, are the themes there. But I would encourage you to sort of start with the February 2023 blog post about keeping your AI claims in check, because I think in the end, that's, sort of, if you do that one, I think a lot of the other things will follow. Here's, as I promised, the list of key actions following Biden's AI executive order. 2 pages, couldn't get it to fit on 1 page. And then here is that handy dandy list, last updated on February 2nd, of US litigation involving generative AI. You'll see a lot of them have been dismissed and all of that, but that resources will be available to you in the slides. And that just gives you an idea of how many there are. Thank you all very much for spending your past hour with us.